A reign of terror ends, and an enduring mystery begins. As Russian troops swarm over Berlin, Adolf Hitler takes his own life. Or does he?
My Soviet friends found no trace of Hitler himself.
The trouble was, nobody had actually seen the body.
Could Hitler have dodged the Red Army and escaped at the last moment? That's what Soviet leader Joseph Stalin claimed.
He believed that Hitler was alive.
How else could Hitler have disappeared so completely? Now, examine the facts behind the legend.
These are definitely Hitler's teeth.
And learn the true story of Adolf Hitler's mysterious end. April 1945. History's deadliest war is nearly over. The defeat of Nazi Germany is certain, but one grave question remains. What will be the fate of the man who started it all? Adolf Hitler. At his hands, a continent lies in ruins, and tens of millions are dead. To a shell-shocked world, Hitler's unprecedented campaign of destruction deserves only one penalty: death. But many fear that somehow he will escape. Already the press carries tales of body doubles who will take Hitler's place, allowing him to flee. Other stories warn that if Hitler lives, he'll raise a new generation to accomplish what he could not: the conquest of Europe.
People were afraid that the war would go on. The last thing they wanted was a disappearance of Hitler or the leadership, and thinking, God, it's not over yet. It's not over until we actually find him, until we know that he's dead.
These fears are only the beginning. Long after the war's end, Hitler's whereabouts will remain a mystery. Key eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence will lie buried for half a century, while rumors fly of Hitler's escape to all corners of the globe.
Some of them emerged from Madrid, where there were stories of huge submarines being prepared in the north for the escape of the Nazi government.
He was going to Japan. Japan is obvious because that was an ally of Germany.
Not only were Nazi bigwigs, even Adolf Hitler, escaping to Argentina, but from Argentina they had established a secret U-boat base in Antarctica.
The rumors will trigger animosity among the war's victors as they accuse one another of hiding Hitler. Decades later, some neo-Nazis will cling to the tales as proof of Hitler's invincibility. Is it possible that Hitler could have escaped? What really happened to Hitler at the war's end? The mystery begins in Berlin. April 1945. Whatever window of escape Hitler has is rapidly closing. For months, the Allies have owned Germany's skies, making air travel deadly. Their relentless bombardment has filled Berlin's streets with rubble, hampering escape by car. Now, the Red Army is closing in, and no one wants to nab Adolf Hitler more than Soviet chief Joseph Stalin.
There was no doubt that Stalin and the Russians wanted to take Berlin. To Stalin, if he could capture Berlin, and even more so capture Hitler, he would be at the very pinnacle of his immense power.
Stalin's generals craft a battle plan to make sure they, and they alone, seize Berlin, and hopefully Adolf Hitler. Rather than drive west and allow the Americans to attack from the other side, they will encircle the city. man they are after will not go easily. Unrepentant, Adolf Hitler is convinced his nation has betrayed him by losing the war. And he's determined not to be captured by Stalin. He orders his men to fight to the death.
Surrender was never an option as far as Hitler was concerned. He was, if you like, a compulsive gambler, and this notion of just throwing in your last chips, your last battalions, meant that somehow he would win in the end.
When the Red Army reaches Berlin, its soldiers outnumber defenders 10-1. Yet they must claim the city block by block, house by house. Finally, on May 2nd, after 17 days of fighting, the last garrison keeping the Red Army from Adolf Hitler surrenders. Radios worldwide trumpet the news.
Berlin has fallen. Marshal Stalin has just announced the complete capture of the capital of Germany.
But where is the warmonger behind it all? The first reports say Adolf Hitler is dead.
Just about an hour and a quarter ago, the German radio said that Hitler had died fighting with his men against the Russians at his command post in Berlin.
Could this really be Hitler's hour of reckoning? Almost immediately, conflicting accounts dashed the world's hopes. The Russian press scoffs at the notion that Hitler died fighting and insists he committed suicide. The Americans claim Hitler was ill.
There are some reports that Hitler died as the result of a stroke suffered several days ago. There are other reports that Hitler was not in Berlin at all, that he's been hiding out and that he may still be alive, that the German story of his death is only a ruse to permit him to escape.
One thing will solve the mystery: Hitler's corpse. Yet days pass, and the Russians produce no body. Six days after the battle ends, the Germans officially capitulate. The world celebrates. Still, the Red Army does not come up with a captive, a cadaver, or solid proof of Hitler's end. Then Russian soldiers summon cameramen to this scene near Hitler's headquarters. But again, high hopes are crushed.
Their doctors came to the conclusion that it was what they call a bad double of Hitler and not Hitler himself. If that is so, then all trace of him has disappeared.
The reports of the double heighten suspicion that the real Hitler is not dead, but has escaped, and the unidentified man is a plant to allow him to flee. A month after the Germans surrender, the Soviets finally make an announcement, and it stuns the world. Russia's top general, Georgy Zhukov, says his men have found no sign of Hitler. The German dictator may have flown away at the last moment. What's more, Zhukov says, the Nazi chief married before he disappeared. It is the first the public learns of Eva Braun.
There had been a real conspiracy of silence. Only a few people around Hitler, those people who were in his immediate entourage, knew about her existence and their relationship.
He had always made this great point, that he was sacrificing his life, he was giving himself to Germany, he was married to Germany. So the concept that the Führer has actually married produced almost disbelief.
The revelation raises talk of an escape to a fever pitch. To many, marriage is not the last act of a doomed man. Doubts about Hitler's death invade the highest levels of the U.S. government. Not long after American commander Dwight Eisenhower meets Zhukov in Berlin, he tells one reporter Hitler may still be alive.
There was a great deal of confusion. The Allies didn't know where he was, and therefore didn't know what to believe.
It seems to the world at large that a horrible nightmare may have come true. One of history's greatest villains has fooled the Russians, cheated the world, and escaped.
ריצ'רד וג'וני עושים חושבים. האם לקאובויז בסרטים יש תמיד מטרות מושלמות? האם הם תמיד פוגעים בול? עונה חדשה בסדרה ככה זה עובד. שני עד שישי ב7.
ראשון עד חמישי. רן לוי, דפנה לוסטיק, נוגה קוואמי, דניאלה, מיקה, ליה ושירה. כל מה שקורה במוזיקה. המגזין, ראשון עד חמישי, 6:30, במוזיקה 24. Adolf Hitler's disappearance in May 1945 will trigger an international manhunt and spark fears that he could return to wreak devastation once again. But at the heart of the mystery is the question of how the world's most wanted man could pull off an escape. When could Hitler have slipped away unnoticed? On April 20th, 1945, 12 days before Berlin falls, witnesses see him there. It is his 56th birthday. In the garden above his bunker, he greets boys who have been bravely battling the Red Army. These last images of a madman on the verge of his downfall also show that he is still leaving his destructive mark on the world. These youngsters are not volunteers. In a final decree, the Nazis have summoned every hand to Berlin's defense. But with those of fighting age already at the front or dead, the order condemns thousands of old men and boys to certain death. In another merciless decision, Hitler has refused to evacuate the city's women and children.
Hitler never considered anything that he didn't want to consider. The possibility of actually looking after the civilian population had never occurred to him whatsoever.
Millions seek refuge beneath the city streets. An explorer of underground Berlin, Dietmar Arnold, has investigated how the helpless survived.
There were 60 to 80 people in this room, mainly women with children and old people.
6 people packed into a room meant for 20. With no food, no electricity, and no running water.
The mothers had to go out to the pumps on the street to get water. Very often, they never came back.
And where is Hitler while chaos consumes Berlin? He is holed up in his personal bunker, a cramped warren of heavily reinforced concrete more than 30 feet underground, in the heart of the German capital. By April 1945, Hitler has been living here for months, while his public appearances have grown more and more rare. As the Russians close in, he already has the one thing he most needs to pull off an escape: invisibility. If Hitler had the opportunity to escape, he would also need a way to get past the Red Army. But that too is not a problem. While his final orders condemn millions to death, he and his men have tanks, airplanes, and even U-boats at their disposal. And many won't hesitate to use them.
Almost up to the last moments, it was theoretically possible for him to leave the city.
After they greet Hitler in Berlin on his birthday, top Nazis, Hermann Goering, head of the Air Force, Heinrich Himmler, chief of the SS, and Albert Speer, Hitler's favorite minister, flee the city as fast as they can. In all, 2,000 Nazis abandon Berlin and its civilian population. Adolf Hitler could easily join the exodus.
Nazi party leaders seized any car they could, or any aeroplane or train, to try to escape. They all had good military reasons, they claimed, for getting out of Berlin, but basically they were just escaping.
The men and boys Hitler has ordered to fight to the death do their job so well they keep routes open for the fleeing leaders. The Russians do not seal off main roads heading south and west until April 24th. They do not seize the last of the city's airports until the 27th, a week after Hitler is last seen in public. And Hitler has one other means of escape. On his orders, workers turn a central Berlin boulevard into an airstrip. On April 29th, just 3 days before the city falls, Soviet troops are shocked to see a small two-seater appear. The plane taxis within firing range of dozens of enemy soldiers, and they do nothing to stop it.
Suddenly this aircraft appeared and took off in front of their eyes, and because they were so astonished, they didn't even open fire until it was too late.
Later those men would wonder if they had let Adolf Hitler get away. Still, in April 1945, the century's most notorious criminal would not easily find refuge. Where would Adolf Hitler go? Certainly not to the east. In their 3-year invasion of Russia, German soldiers sacked and slaughtered at will. Of the 25 million killed, most were civilians. Fearful of Soviet retribution, thousands of Germans risked their lives to reach the American front lines.
The war in Eastern Europe was a race war designed to enslave or exterminate. If this man was going to flee, he would go to the West.
Hitler sightings soon surface all over Western Europe. One Nazi pilot tells of spiriting his leader to Denmark. Other reports claim Hitler is disguised as a shepherd in the Alps, or as a dealer in a posh French casino. One of the most disturbing stories comes from Sweden. It says Hitler and his bride, Eva Braun, had 2 children and fled to be with them. The report revives fears of Hitler's spawn, training to lead a Nazi revival. For many, the story is chilling proof that Hitler's urge to destroy will live forever, even if in some other form.
He was viewed in the West as being something beyond human, something sheer evil. Was it really possible for him to be dead?
Then, in July 1945, the question of Hitler's whereabouts becomes more than rumor. It balloons into a propaganda weapon. When the war's victors meet outside Berlin, Joseph Stalin insists that Hitler is still alive. He suggests the German leader fled to Japan by U-boat, or perhaps to Spain, where Europe's last fascist, Francisco Franco, still rules. The accusations are an ominous sign that Stalin will use Hitler's disappearance to rattle his enemies.
Stalin, in his usual rather sphinx-like way, wanted to keep everybody guessing, to be able to make everybody uncertain, both in his own entourage and, of course, on the world stage, appealed to his vanity and his very perverse sense of humor.
Then, an intriguing clue surfaces that suggests Stalin may be onto something. A German U-boat pulls into a foreign port, not in Japan or Spain, but in the South American nation of Argentina.
Argentina had been the last Latin American country to get into the war. It was a place with an enormously large German immigrant community.
Argentina's Juan Perón is an open admirer of Hitler's regime, and the country is already home to many powerful Nazis. In the coming years, many more will arrive, including the wanted war criminals Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the death camps, and Joseph Mengele, dubbed Auschwitz's Doctor of Death. Was Hitler planning to join his henchmen in Argentina, and with them, plot his return? For Adolf Hitler to escape Berlin, as so many in 1945 believe, he would need lots of help. His greatest ally had always been Italy's tempestuous ruler, Benito Mussolini. But by the summer of 1945, Mussolini has suffered a humiliating end. Assassinated by communists, his corpse is strung up by its heels. A punishment the world envisions for Hitler himself.
The final degradation. Mussolini and his mistress hang from the rafters of a gas station as Taracci, one of his hangmen, goes up. There are none to mourn.
Hitler's other close friend in Europe, Spain's Francisco Franco, clings precariously to power. But Argentina has recently fallen under the sway of its right-wing military, led by Juan Perón. Yet at first, no one suspects Perón of harboring Hitler. Under intense American pressure, Argentina had declared war on Germany in March 1945. There are also the 7,000 miles separating the two countries, a huge distance for Hitler to travel undetected. But 2 months after the war ends, Argentina and Perón fall under intense scrutiny when a pair of U-boats appears off the coast. The first, U-530, surfaces on July 10th. 5 weeks later, the second arrives. Reports immediately fly that Hitler has harnessed Nazi Germany's stealthiest weapon to make a nearly miraculous getaway.
This certainly caused quite a stir. Why would a U-boat come to Argentina after the end of the war unless there was some covert reason for it to do so?
The Argentines quickly turned the crews over to the Americans for questioning. At the U.S. National Archives, historian Tim Mulligan has uncovered the interrogators' files. They show that the first U-boat, U-530, was already at sea when Hitler disappeared.
U-530 had already been on mission since March of 1945. And in this case, the captain apparently persuaded the crew that perhaps their best option was to go to Argentina.
But the story of the second boat, U-977, raises more questions. U-977 does not leave its base in Norway until May 2nd, just as Russian soldiers are overrunning Hitler's bunker.
ברגע המפגש בין הזרע לביצית נקבעים האינטליגנציה, המראה והיכולת הגופנית שלנו. כעבור 9 חודשים מסתיימת ההרפתקה הגדולה ביותר בחיינו. בתוך הרחם, חוויית החיים שלפני הלידה, סרט חובה לכל מורי העתיד. בתוך הרחם, ועכשיו הגרסה המלאה ב-DVD בעברית וברוסית. לפרטים www.ngcisrael.co.il או בטלפון 054-492-9929. מאות מומיות נמצאו קבורות במדבר הסיני. גובהן כ1.80 ותווי הפנים שלהם אירופאיים. הם חיו 1000 שנה לפני שידעו על קשר כלשהו בין המזרח למערב. מי הם היו? האם בדיקת DNA של שרידי הגופות תוכל לשפוך אור על התרבות האבודה? תעלומת המומיות מסין, בקרוב.
Germany invaded Norway in 1940, and in May 1945, its armies still occupy the country. If Hitler does succeed in flying from Berlin, as the Russians suggest, he could flee to Norway. There, he could board U-977 before it sets off on May 2nd, with orders to patrol the North Atlantic. U-977 is not the only U-boat at sea at war's end. When most get news of Germany's capitulation, they surrender. But U-977 does not turn up for another 2.5 months.
Altogether, they were at sea 105 days. By contrast, the longest U.S. submarine patrol of all of World War II was only 84 days.
The journey's length leads many to believe U-977 took a detour. Perhaps it traveled to southern Argentina, or even the Antarctic, and dropped Hitler before it surrendered. Suddenly, South America is awash in Hitler sightings. Tips pour into FBI headquarters in Washington and set off alarm bells as high as the office of Director J. Edgar Hoover.
Adolf Hitler is on a ranch 450 miles northwest of Buenos Aires.
Hitler is in Bogota, Colombia.
Hitler is in room 1027, Continental Hotel, Argentina.
The tips warn of rich Nazi sympathizers and secret hangouts where Hitler is hiding. Fearful Hitler's Nazi party could re-emerge in the Americas. FBI agents will spend the next decade on the case and compile a file more than 700 pages thick. With Hitler sightings stretching from Europe to the Americas, pressure builds on the Allies to produce him. Military police in Germany stop thousands and even go house to house on the hunt for him. They detain this man, Heinrich Noll, numerous times. There's little sign of the German leader. But the crackdown does pay off in other ways. Soldiers nab many of Hitler's top lieutenants, men who fled Berlin as the Russians were closing in. German Naval Chief Karl Dönitz surrenders to the British along with munitions minister Albert Speer. British soldiers also capture Heinrich Himmler, head of the dreaded SS. When Himmler realizes his captors intend to imprison him, or worse, he commits suicide by swallowing poison. The Americans find Air Force Chief Hermann Goering hiding in Austria. They also uncover his cache of stolen art. The Allies bring 21 Nazis, all with close ties to Hitler, before an international tribunal. Judges convict 18 of the 21. They sentence 11 to hang.
The trap was sprung on scaffold number 2 at 1:19, and death came at 1:33.
More repentant than the others, Albert Speer gets 20 years in prison. Just before his turn on the gallows, Goering swallows poison and is found dead in his cell. Throughout Europe, Nazis and their collaborators suffer violent retribution. But the dragnet does not squelch talk that the worst criminal of all, the mastermind behind the rape of a continent, is still free. By the fall of 1945, clues to Adolf Hitler's whereabouts are drying up. And Soviet leader Joseph Stalin is growing impatient that his greatest enemy is apparently still at large. To boost his image and the communist cause, he infuriates his wartime allies by suggesting that they are harboring Hitler.
Stalin used every possible means he could to somehow associate the Allies with Hitler. What he was trying to do was somehow to imply that the Western Allies, as capitalists, were in fact secret supporters of the Nazis.
Contacts between Britain and the Soviet Union are fast growing cold as ice. Then the Russians make their most shocking accusation yet. A Soviet paper reports that Adolf Hitler is living in the British-occupied zone of Germany, in the comfort of a castle. British leaders are outraged.
This was taken very personally in London. It was clearly an accusation I think the British sort of looked upon as being criminal.
They order an investigation into Hitler's mysterious disappearance. But Stalin refuses to help. He will not let British investigators question members of Hitler's staff sent to prisons in Moscow. Nazi leaders captured by the West can't say for sure what happened to Hitler. Air Force Chief Hermann Goering tells the press he last saw Hitler in Berlin, alive. Yet these captives can answer one crucial question. What was Hitler's state of mind? He had the means to escape. He had the opportunity. Did he have the will? Witnesses describe seeing Hitler on April 20th, his birthday, and urging him to flee. Hitler's response? He would stay in Berlin. By war's end, the witnesses say Hitler was a far different man than the omnipotent savior he claimed to be. He stumbled, and his arm twitched violently.
Hitler at that particular stage was in a very, very bad way. He was stooped right over, and altogether he looked, as most people said, at least 20 years older than his real age.
If Adolf Hitler had decided to leave Berlin, he was likely too ill to go far. Then an arrest in December 1945 gives British investigators another piece of their puzzle. Arthur Axmann had led the Hitler Youth, the teenagers drafted to the Nazi cause. He says he was in Hitler's bunker on April 30th. And he saw Adolf Hitler dead. It seems that the news the world first heard 7 months earlier is true. Adolf Hitler died in Berlin. Why then are the Russians insisting he escaped? It could be that they are confused because they never found his body. Or they are lying.
Neither Eisenhower nor British military leaders seemed to press the Russians very much on this issue. And to me, that was a mistake.
Stalin's charge that the West is harboring Adolf Hitler and other Nazi fugitives will survive for decades after the war.
In the confusion at the end of the war, when papers are destroyed and when people can change their names and forge identity papers, a lot of Nazis were able to leave.
But not all were cases of mistaken identity. We now know American intelligence helped the butcher of Lyon, France, Klaus Barbie, escape justice for decades. Despite his role in deporting thousands of Jews, including children, to Auschwitz. Would the Western powers go so far as to protect Adolf Hitler? In 1945, the British are struggling to prove they would not. But if Hitler is dead, where is his body? For 2 months after the war, the Red Army kept a tight lid on Berlin. It was not until July that Western soldiers got their first look at Hitler's bunker. These pictures, the first taken by an American, show the garden above the bunker. If Hitler died here, as witnesses say, his remains should be nearby. But when investigators try to search for them, the Red Army stops them. It is a clear sign that the Russians have something to hide. Yet what does Stalin gain by concealing Hitler's fate?
Stalin was suspicious of everyone around him.
His greatest fear is that the war hero General Georgy Zhukov might grow powerful enough to depose him.
he was not about to accept the fact that the military could have the prestige of telling the world it had discovered that Hitler was dead, that in effect the military had destroyed him.
And Stalin has another dread, Hitler's power to strike from beyond the grave. If he's missing, his tomb can never become a rallying point for his believers. Stalin becomes so invested in the escape myth, he goes to his grave without ever acknowledging the truth.
I personally believe that he convinced himself that Hitler was still alive.
In the years after Stalin's death, the details of Hitler's end slowly trickle out. In the 1950s, the Soviets free Rochus Mish and Hitler's other close aides, allowing them to tell their stories. But Stalin's cover-up is so vast. It is not until the Soviet Union breaks apart that the Russians open their archives, and witnesses come forward to explain exactly what happened to Hitler.
מטריה, אבטיח וגיטרה חשמלית. מי מהם יוכל להצילנו בעת סופת ברקים? התשובות בסדרה החדשה מה יקרה אם www.ngcisrael.co.il. מידע על תוכניות המשודרות בערוץ, דימונים, קבצים להורדה, תחרויות ופרסים. אתם יכולים אפילו למצוא מידע נוסף על מה שראיתם בערוץ. מדריך צפייה, תזכורות אישיות לתוכניות שלא תרצו להחמיץ. www.ngcisrael.co.il. עוד קליק. לרוץ בין הטיפות, לאכול חמים, לשתות שוקו חם, לעשות סקי, לטייל בין כלניות ורקפות, להתקרבל מתחת הפוך, לקפוץ בשלוליות, לנפוש בתאילנד. מה אתם אוהבים לעשות בחורף? תעדו את פעילות החורף האהובה עליכם והשתתפו בתחרות הצילום דברים שעושים בחורף של ערוץ National Geographic. עוד פרטים באתר האינטרנט www.ngcisrael.co.il.
In late April 1945, as the Red Army encircles Berlin, Adolf Hitler has little choice but to flee or fall into the hands of his greatest enemy, Joseph Stalin.
If he surrendered, he was going to meet a very vengeful and horrific end.
To nab his nemesis, Stalin sends his most loyal soldiers, a counterintelligence team called Smersh, for death to spies.
This was one of the most secret operations that the Soviet Union had ever mounted. The Smersh detachment had been threatened with death, that they should never mention anything that they were about to find.
On May 2nd, Smersh agents enter the garden above Hitler's bunker, now strewn with bodies. They easily identify the charred remains of Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels, his distinctive profile unmistakable. In the bunker's depths, they make their most horrific discovery. The bodies of the Goebbels' 6 children. The youngsters had gone to the bunker to escape the bombing, not knowing they would die there, poisoned by their mother. On May 5th, day 3 of their search, a soldier spots a charred shred of a blanket in a shell hole. Below he finds a corpse, burned beyond recognition. There's only one way to know if it's really Hitler: the teeth. Smersh officers scurry around war-torn Berlin in search of Hitler's dental team.
It was fairly extraordinary, if not close to miraculous, that they tracked down the assistant to Hitler's personal dentist.
The assistant draws this picture of Hitler's teeth from memory. It's a match. It seems the corpse is Adolf Hitler. 60 years later, when the Russians finally open their archives, the world is stunned to discover they still have those teeth. Are they really Hitler's? German forensic biologist Dr. Mark Benecki is the first non-Russian scientist to get a close look.
These are the worst teeth that I've ever seen.
So many have handled the teeth, DNA tests would likely be inconclusive. But Benecki has a way to check to see if they truly belong to Hitler. He has X-rays of Hitler's head from 1944, the year before he died.
Here on the top you can see something very interesting. You see that there's kind of a bright spot, whereas everything else is very dense. So the reason is maybe, or most likely, that it's the dental work that you can see here.
If the teeth are Hitler's, they must have pained him terribly. By the time he died, his dentist had replaced nearly all of them with gold bridgework.
The only teeth that we are 100% certain that were there were the 4 teeth in the front and the bottom. These ones. Hitler went to the dentist and said, really, I just can't go to a dentist anymore for the next 10 or 20 years. Really do something that fixes it forever. And that's exactly what he did. It's dental overkill, I would say.
But the dense metal makes for easy identification. It shows up as white shadows on the X-rays.
One very massive structure is this huge metal bridge. It looks like, a little bit like a U shape. This is exactly what you have here. These are definitely Hitler's teeth. That is 100% certain.
The teeth prove Adolf Hitler is dead. And they are just part of the evidence the Russians have kept hidden for decades. In 1946, when the KGB re-examined Hitler's grave, they found something extraordinary. A fragment of skull. The Russians still have that, too. And it offers a clue to another riddle: how Hitler died. In their autopsy, Russian doctors found glass in Hitler's mouth, a sign he bit down on an ampule of cyanide. But to Benecki, the hole in the skull is evidence of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
This could very well be an exit hole, not the entrance hole, but the exit hole. The part of Hitler's skull that is left at the State Archive is on the back, on the left side. The trajectory of the bullet must have been coming from down a little bit to the side.
The new forensics and the testimony of Hitler's former aides bring us closer than ever to solving the mystery of Adolf Hitler's death. Hitler's phone operator, SS officer Rochus Misch, is the only surviving witness to what happened that day. On the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Eva Braun are left alone, with 2 loaded pistols and vials of poison.
We were all quiet. Everyone just listened. And then somebody called, "I think it is time." After the door was open, I saw Hitler and Eva. She was lying on the couch. I still remember this image today.
Eva Braun had taken poison. Most believed Hitler shot himself, but neither Misch nor any other witnesses actually examined him. Could he have also swallowed cyanide, as the Russians claim?
Hitler was so terrified of being captured by the Russians, not wanting to leave anything to chance, he decided to do the 2 things simultaneously, shooting himself and taking the poison.
The poison may not have killed Hitler instantly.
Cyanide kills you because it attaches itself to parts of the blood usually used to get the oxygen that you breathe into your system. Your body continues to breathe very deeply, like very, very deeply, but it doesn't help you anymore.
Hitler may still have had time to pick up his pistol and fire. Adolf Hitler never tried to flee Berlin. He continued his wanton path of destruction until he brought down everything he claimed to hold dear, even Germany.
He actually believed that Germany should die with him. He was its incarnation. He was going to commit suicide. Germany should die too.
Even Hitler's last orders called for destruction of his own body. Aides, now deceased, have described what happened. The men carry Hitler's corpse to the garden above the bunker. They soak it with 50 gallons of gasoline. Their orders are to cremate it completely, so Stalin can never put it on display. But with war raging just beyond the garden walls, the men are forced to take shelter before the job is done. From the bunker garden, Hitler's body begins a bizarre, decades-long odyssey. Retired KGB agent Sergei Kondrashov has only recently come forward to explain that mystery and why he helped hide the truth for 50 years.
At that time, there were people who did not want to give up finding the remains and maybe erecting a shrine.
Joseph Stalin could have destroyed his greatest enemy forever, but he didn't. Instead, he had his men hang on to the body.
They didn't know how to play it. Nothing was said about the discovery of Hitler's body, so they had to keep it secret. At the same time, they might change their policy and suddenly want to put it on show to the rest of the world to show that they did have it.
The Red Army stashes Hitler's remains in an ammunition box and buries them. But they fear someone might find the body. It becomes a proverbial hot potato. When the soldiers switch bases, they dig Hitler up, and they take him with them. Hitler is exhumed and reburied as many as 8 times. Not until 1970 does Adolf Hitler disappear for good, when Russia abandons these military barracks in Magdeburg, Germany, where he is buried. Moscow orders Sergei Kondrashov, now KGB chief in East Berlin, to dig up Hitler one last time.
The boxes were finally removed, burnt to the state of ashes, and thrown into the sewer.
From there, an East German river carried Adolf Hitler out to sea. Hitler's bunker in Berlin is also no more. Imploded by the Russians in 1947, it is now a parking lot. Just a stone's throw from Berlin's memorial to victims of the Holocaust. Today, most of us readily accept that Adolf Hitler died in Berlin in 1945. Yet millions once feared him so much, the idea of his escape struck terror in their hearts. And today, in some ways, he still lives. Hitler remains a messiah of a few on the extreme right, and he haunts the nightmares of the rest of us.
The world really never got its revenge. If you kept him alive, there's always the chance to somehow get even with him.
The willingness to believe in Adolf Hitler's escape is a testament, not to whether it could have happened, but to the overwhelming magnitude of his crimes.